Hello everyone, welcome to day 2 of the 1 Year On series. This episode is called Please Don't Cut Me Off. And today we're going to look at the text message exchange that went on between me and Mr. C on this day. Now, because it's so early on in this journey, I feel it's important to share the full day's exchange, as by having a full picture of the communication and sharing what I was feeling at the time, it will give some context to the relationship and my mindset at the point when I had reached what I describe as my pain point, where I decided that enough was enough. I'll also highlight and explain some of the tactics that I now know about. So whilst I won't be reading out each message, I will give a little context and pick out the parts that I feel will be useful to develop your understanding. And I'll flash up some definitions. But if you want to read through it without my voice as a distraction, then hit mute, read through it first, and then listen to me after. So the first message is a long message, and it starts by telling me what not to do. Then he goes on to apologise, and by this time I have had many of his apologies, and so they don't hold a lot of weight. But he also goes on to offer an explanation for his behaviour. He says there's no excuse. And this is a line that I feel like I fed him really in the past, because when we've been attempting to resolve past disputes, I used to say that he confused explanations with excuses, and that there is no excuse for intimidating, controlling, accusing and blaming. He goes on to then request that we talk like grown-ups. Again, one of my lines, because I used to get so frustrated with how immature at times the conversation could be and how it could go around in circles, and use a technique called word salad. And then he says that we should communicate not by text message. Now, he's not only telling me how to communicate here, he then goes on to tell me what we should be talking about, that I should talk about my feelings and the fact that we're having a baby. And he then goes on to declare his love for me, which is a grand gesture, and offers to do something he knows I've asked of him in the past, which is listen. Even in the same text message, he very quickly manages to flip the blame onto me for requesting that he, a 42-year-old man, takes responsibility for his own health and the impact it could have on his family. And then finally, he tells me again what not to do before he mentions his father. And his mention of his father is in an attempt to remind me of his own personal trauma, to kind of remind me of the things that he struggles with. And essentially he's making an excuse again. And for somebody who has said that there was no excuse, there's a lot of subliminal excuses used in this message, and I can't express to you enough how much he has used all the things he knows about me and the things that I've said in the past to try and convince me to communicate with him at this point. I've recreated this conversation in an app, so it doesn't show the time codes, but I didn't respond to this message for nearly 2 hours. And then he sends the following message, which says, please don't cut me off. Interestingly, now having learnt so much about abuse and the abuser's mentality, this is practically a clear admission that he doesn't want to lose the supply that I feed him with. But actually he does provoke a response from me. And this message got me to reply because I was worried about what he might do if I didn't respond. Around 5 months before this, he'd made an attempt to take his own life when I had left and I wouldn't go back. And so I felt a lot of emotional responsibility on my shoulders. So in my reply, I know I have to stand my ground and be clear that I wasn't up for convincing. And the way I had said that it was enough and left the day before had definitely felt different for both of us, I'm sure. And all the other times he'd chased me out of the house, but this time I had left calmly and sure. I had a feeling he would bombard me with all of the what about this and what about that kind of scenarios to try and scare me into thinking that I couldn't cope on my own. So it was very important that I was clear about not rushing things and processing. Trying to think 2 or 3 steps ahead is a natural part of living in survival mode because our body is trying to anticipate danger and protect ourselves at all times. The next few messages, he's starting to get really worried, and he either doesn't want what he has to say to go on record or he can't be bothered to write it out. He often spoke of trust, yet I'd never done anything to give him reason not to trust me. And projection is a very common tactic. And even though I couldn't see it at the time, some of these messages are tantamount to confession. And when these messages don't work, he then turns to the grand gestures and the love bombing really gets going. He rarely sent messages that were longer than 1 line, but here we've got whole paragraphs of almost poetic like text, promise after promise, all of which I'd heard before and believed only to be let down. And so in my next message, I stay resolute, but I do confess how I feel. I remember feeling anxious each time one of these messages came in. I was exhausted and fed up of saying the same things that I had said before over and over again, but with it all being so new and I'm not really sure what would happen next, I felt like I needed to maintain contact whilst I was still standing my ground. I really was telling the truth there. I was absolutely broken. Now, I've responded twice by this point, and reading these back, I can sense that he is feeling more in control. His messages are getting shorter and he's starting to minimise what happened. He rolls it up into all the other occasions where he's got away with making his excuses, and he's convincing me it's something other than his own behaviour to blame, playing on my people-pleasing, empathetic nature by asking me to do it for each other. I was desperate for all this to stop. If I could have flicked a switch and erased it all from my memory, I really would have. Again, I reiterate how I felt in the next message, how his actions said something very different to his words. And in the past, I probably wouldn't have been quite so clear on how I felt and tried to sugarcoat it, as I was always unsure whether this was really it, whether I'd find myself going back. But this time I knew I wasn't going back. And so as difficult as I found it at the time, I made the decision to be clear about reaching the end of the road. And here we get some true colours starting to show from his side. The love bombing didn't work, so now it's on to blame shifting and threatening language. And I call him out on the empty promises and declared that I'm going to get help. And this is probably the first time I declared that I needed to seek outside help to deal with my emotions. And in doing that, he is losing the sense of control, and he's trying to deflect the blame onto me as if I had ever been in control at any point of this relationship. I mean, looking back, the declaration that he is letting me go implies he's in control of me anyway. And so by this point, I'm hooked in with these messages, and I feel like I need to keep explaining myself. And I'm giving him supply here. But I almost wanted to remind him of how many times he had broken these promises before he starts blaming me. This message is very much from my ego and me trying to kind of stand up for myself. And his response is to bring up money. And the financial mess that he refers to doesn't exist, but he does know that by me leaving him, I'm leaving our business. And since money is the currency of power and control for abusers, it isn't surprising that he brings it up on day 2 of our breakup, which is really like day 1. I feel like I need to defend the control thing in the next message. It's just not in my nature to try and control other people. I want to support them, I want to encourage them, I want to help them, and I've always known I can't force someone else to do something. Here he's projecting. He knows what to say to provoke a response from me. He knows that by saying that I'm controlling him, it's going to get a response because I don't like that. The idea that I would control someone. And he's made it his business to learn the things that I don't like and to use them against me, because this is what abusers do. And then we get more threats. And I think that this should read, I can't do it on my own, because the blame shifting that I am the one that's inflicting this is such a common manipulation tactic. And then the toys come out of the pram when he says, I don't want to be a single father, because he's out of control here. And he holds the belief that if he doesn't want something, then he shouldn't get it. Obviously, these messages have struck a chord with me at the time, and I felt obliged to respond. So I reiterate my point, I remind him of how I've reached my decision, and I almost feel like I need to justify it to him to demonstrate how we have got to this point, even though he already knows all of this. And now he starts bargaining. He will do it if I do it. Despite me always keeping my promises, he thinks I need to adjust my behaviour even more. Everything I did would be wrong in some way. Even the things he told me to change about myself, I would change them wrong. By this point, I literally didn't recognise myself in the mirror. Then he goes back to this letting me be statement. Again, this idea that he can control me, pick me up, put me down. In the next message, I really start to stand up for myself, talking about how nothing I ever did was good enough, or there always being somewhere where I went wrong. I start to reveal how I feel too, probably for the first time, sharing that I felt like a shell of a woman and that our relationship wasn't normal. He takes this message as an insult and is attempting to take the control again. I've obviously overstepped the mark with my previous message, and my distance and rudeness was more than likely informed by my fear and walking on eggshells. He then is able to make me the bad guy and declare what wonderful memories he has of our relationship. He's denying my truth here. And that is a very common tactic in manipulating another person. But he's got to me now, and I am now giving him the supply he craves. I've written a big long message about what he has done, and I'm clearly pissed off, and I'm standing up for myself. And I did feel very unsafe, I did feel very foolish, and I had run out of energy. And I've probably never been this honest about my feelings in a message before. Usually I would be reassuring him that whatever had caused him to behave that way was understandable and that we would find a way through it. Like I said yesterday, something clicked. And whilst on reflection, I probably shouldn't have run such long messages, and I wouldn't advise somebody in the same situation to write long messages. I advise you to keep them short. I am proud of how much I stand my ground in these messages, and often we do what we know at the time, and he can sense that he's lost me, and now he starts to beg with the next messages. Then he uses bargaining and promising and pulling on my heartstrings a little bit more. And I call him out and I write down what happened. And I actually remember writing this message, and I remember finding it really difficult to write out the words and read them. And I even deleted it, feeling like it was too cruel to remind him what he did. I remember it as clear as day, but I also wanted him to realise it, so I rewrote it and I sent it, and I remember feeling like I knew that it was a really big step. And then I get more begging, more emotional heartstrings, more reminders of his past experiences in a bid to try and excuse his behaviour. And he's asking me to remember the good in him, even though the good in him was no more real than the promises that he continued to break. Writing down how you honestly feel can have a really positive impact on you, and it can make you clear in what's going on. Sometimes it acts as a pep talk to yourself, like confirmation that what you think is right for you right now probably is right for you right now. And this message is without doubt one of those messages. It sounds so much more confident than the woman who wrote it. And I'm not sure when I wrote some things are more important than us, I actually meant it, but I do know it was true and right. I was almost giving myself advice. And so the next run of messages from him, he can sense this. He's starting to offer to do whatever I asked. When you are a controller and you operate with control, giving over that control is like some sort of grand gesture. It's almost like the language that they speak But he doesn't forget to tell me I should be sorry, because he can't hide it completely. I didn't know that at the time, but it is very obvious when I look back at it, this control dynamic. And after 6 messages, it worked, and him saying that he was sorry, it got me to respond, because I was sorry. I wasn't sorry for the same reasons as him. I was sorry for myself. I was sorry for letting myself be treated like this again. The last 8 years were all starting to fall into place for me, and that moment where I'd left my body the day before had empowered me, along with an experience I had had a few months before, where my connection with the universe had really got quite strong, and it was getting stronger, and I was sorry. But I wasn't sorry to him. He'd done this. And then we get these messages where he is really trying to pull on my heartstrings. He knows how much bringing up the kids will get to me. And so I comply. I say that I will tell my daughter. And for the first time, all day in the messages, I comply and he says thank you. And that says so much to me about how this relationship of control operates. I have found that going over these messages has had a very healing effect on me, but you do have to come at it with a very analytical mindset. I would say it took me 8 to 10 months to get to the point where I could read all these messages for what they are, and educating yourself on the mechanics of abuse is a vital part of the healing journey. It's something we will come back to time and time again as we explore my own personal story. And if there's anything that I've mentioned that you'd like more information about or a further definition, please let me know, and I will try to explain it in more depth and help you to understand and maybe recognise some of these tactics of abuse that you might be subjected to for what they are. Because when we see things for what they are, it makes it much easier for us to detach emotionally, and for our response to become about protecting ourselves, about healing our emotional wounds, and about growing and learning and living a life that we feel fulfilled and happy in. So please reach out. Thank you for listening. If you would like to follow the story and be notified of any updates, please follow the links in my bio, the links in the comment, or the links in the post, depending on what platform you're watching this in. And I look forward to seeing you soon.